The soft hum of the city outside filtered through the window as I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop illuminating the scattered blueprints strewn across the surface. I was supposed to be focused, deep in the creative flow of my latest architectural project, but my thoughts kept drifting. I glanced at the clock. Sarah was still packing for her weekend trip, and I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like a storm cloud ready to burst. "Jake, can you help me with this?" Sarah called from the bedroom, her voice slightly strained. I sighed, pushing my chair back and standing up. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of unspoken words and resentments, and it felt like we were two ships passing in the night, each of us lost in our own world. "Sure, give me a second," I replied, making my way to the bedroom. As I entered, I found her surrounded by an array of clothes, the bed a chaotic mix of colors and fabrics. She looked up, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I can't find my favorite dress. I thought it was in this pile." "Maybe it's in the laundry," I suggested, trying to keep my tone light. It was hard to ignore the growing distance between us, but I didn't want to delve into it now, not when she was about to leave for 2 days. "I'll check," she said, turning back to the mess. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her. She was beautiful, no doubt, but there was a weight on her shoulders that seemed to weigh her down. "Oh, by the way," she said, her voice breaking my thoughts, "Mom will be staying with you while I'm gone." I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Linda? Why?" I couldn't hide the disbelief in my voice. My relationship with my mother-in-law had always been cordial, but the thought of being alone with her for an entire weekend was unsettling. "She just wanted to help out, you know. She's been feeling lonely since Dad passed, and I thought it'd be good for both of you." Sarah continued rummaging through the pile, oblivious to my discomfort. "Right, of course," I replied, forcing a smile. "It'll be nice to catch up." The words felt hollow as they left my mouth. The idea of spending time with Linda, my wife's mother, felt more like a burden than a blessing. I turned to leave, trying to shake off the unease settling in my stomach. Later that evening, I found myself in the living room, nursing a glass of whiskey while I waited for Linda to arrive. My mind raced with thoughts of Sarah's trip and the unexpected company that was about to join me. The doorbell rang, cutting through my reverie. I set my glass down and opened the door to find Linda standing there, a warm smile on her face, her arms laden with bags. "Jake, it's so good to see you," she said, stepping inside and dropping her bags by the door. "I brought some snacks and a bottle of your favorite wine." "Thanks, Linda," I said, trying to mask my apprehension. "You didn't have to bring all this." "Nonsense. It's just a little something to make our weekend more enjoyable," she replied, her eyes twinkling. I couldn't help but notice how lovely she looked in her casual attire, her silver hair framing her face perfectly. It was a stark contrast to the heaviness I felt in my chest. We settled down on the couch, the wine bottle gleaming between us. As we poured ourselves glasses, I felt the tension begin to ease. We talked about trivial things, family updates, shared memories of Sarah growing up. But as the evening progressed, I sensed something deeper beneath the surface, an unspoken connection that seemed to draw us closer. "Do you remember that time we all went camping?" Linda asked, her laughter filling the room. "You were so determined to catch a fish for dinner, and all you caught was that old boot." I chuckled, the memory flooding back. "I can't believe you still remember that. I was so proud of my fishing skills, or lack thereof." Linda smiled, her eyes glistening with nostalgia. "It was a memorable trip. Sometimes I miss those days, you know. The laughter, the family. It's hard being alone." Her words struck a chord within me. I glanced down at my wine glass, swirling the liquid as a wave of empathy washed over me. "Yeah, I get that. It's been difficult lately. I feel like I'm drifting, like I'm not really there anymore." Linda's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, the weight of our shared loneliness lingered in the air, creating a fragile bond between us. I could sense that we were both grappling with our own demons, and in this moment of vulnerability, the walls we had built began to crack. The wine had worked its magic on us, the warmth of the rich red liquid loosening the tension that had been palpable in the air. I glanced over at Linda, her eyes shimmering in the soft glow of the lamp, and suddenly, the weight of the evening felt different. The conversation we'd had so far had peeled back layers of our lives, exposing something raw and vulnerable beneath. "Jake," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, "do you ever feel like you're just going through the motions?" I hesitated, caught off guard by her directness. "All the time," I admitted, leaning back in my chair. "It's like the days bleed into one another, and I'm just stuck in this cycle. I love Sarah, but sometimes I feel like we're just two people living under the same roof." Linda nodded, her expression revealing that she understood all too well. "It's been years since Mark passed. I thought I'd adjust, but the loneliness, it creeps in and fills every corner of your life, doesn't it?" Her words hung in the air, a palpable reminder of the isolation we both faced. I could see the vulnerability etched in the lines of her face, the way her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her glass. "I thought family would keep me grounded, but it's just not the same," she added, her voice thick with emotion. "I get that. I think we both do." I felt a magnetic pull towards her, an urge to reach out and bridge the gap between us. "Tell me about him," I said, desperate to understand the pieces of her life that had shaped her into the woman sitting across from me. Linda hesitated, as if the memories were too painful to pluck from the depths of her heart. "Mark was everything to me. We had a life planned out, dreams we shared, and when he was gone, it was like the world lost its color." I felt a pang of sympathy for her, knowing that my own struggles paled in comparison. "I can't imagine how hard that must have been for you." She met my gaze, her eyes searching mine for something. Maybe understanding, maybe connection. "And you? What about your dreams?" As I opened my mouth to respond, a sudden burst of laughter erupted between us, breaking the heaviness of the moment. We both turned to the mantel, where an old family photo captured the essence of happier times. I picked it up, my fingers brushing against hers as she reached for it too. The subtle contact sent a jolt through me, and I quickly withdrew my hand, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks. "Look at this," I said, trying to divert the tension. "Remember that trip to the beach?" "Of course," she laughed, her eyes sparkling. "You and Sarah were so sunburned, you looked like lobsters." We erupted into laughter, the sound echoing through the dimly lit room, and for a moment, it felt like we were just two friends reminiscing, rather than a man and his mother-in-law caught in a web of unspoken desires. But the laughter hung in the air, laced with something deeper, something that made my heart race. As our hands brushed against each other again, I felt an overwhelming urge to lean closer, to confide in her the frustrations I hadn't spoken aloud in years. Linda, But before I could finish, I caught her gaze lingering on me, her eyes searching my face as if weighing the consequences of what we both felt. The laughter faded, replaced by a heavy silence that buzzed with unspoken words. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the tension thickening like fog around us. I should probably get some sleep, I said, forcing the words out, my voice steadier than I felt. I stood up, trying to shake off the electric charge that hung in the air. Yeah, me too, Linda replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As I turned to leave, I felt her gaze follow me, a lingering warmth that ignited a fire of emotions within me. I stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest, knowing that the night had changed something between us. I could no longer deny the connection we shared, and as I lay in bed, the thoughts raced through my mind. The tension, the laughter, and Linda's gaze that promised something forbidden, yet intoxicating. I closed my eyes, grappling with the confusion that enveloped me, feeling both exhilarated and terrified by the path that lay ahead. The day after our night of shared confessions hung heavily in the air, like a thick fog refusing to lift. I sat at my desk, the sun barely filtering through the blinds, casting stripes of light across the scattered blueprints and sketches. My mind was far from the intricacies of architecture. It was trapped in the lingering warmth of Linda's gaze from the night before. Every brush of her fingers against mine, every shared laugh, echoed in my thoughts like a haunting melody I couldn't shake off. Jake? Linda's voice broke through my reverie, and I turned to see her standing in the doorway, a hesitant smile on her face. She looked beautiful in a simple white blouse, her hair cascading down her shoulders. The warmth in her eyes was both inviting and terrifying. "Hey, good morning," I replied, forcing a smile as I tried to redirect my thoughts. "Did you sleep well?" "Not really," she admitted, stepping into the room and leaning against the doorframe. "I kept thinking about everything." I nodded, feeling a knot of tension tighten in my stomach. "Yeah, me too. It's hard to know what to do with all of it." She crossed her arms, a gesture of both vulnerability and defense. I didn't mean for things to get so complicated between us. "Neither did I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "But there's something about you, Linda. I can't explain it." Her expression softened, and I could see the conflict within her. Maybe we should just pretend it never happened. "Pretend?" I scoffed, the bitterness in my tone surprising even me. "How can we pretend when it feels so real?" Linda sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Let's just have breakfast. It'll be easier to talk about this over food." The kitchen was filled with the aroma of coffee brewing, and I could sense the weight of unspoken words as we sat opposite each other at the small dining table. We picked at our food, the silence wrapping around us like a heavy blanket. I glanced up to catch her watching me, her eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "What are you thinking?" I asked, trying to break the tension. "I'm wondering if it's possible to feel so connected to someone and yet feel so wrong about it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't help but nod in agreement. It feels like we're walking a tightrope. One misstep, and everything could come crashing down. Just as I was about to respond, the lights flickered and then went out completely, plunging the room into a dim, eerie twilight. The sudden darkness sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt an inexplicable thrill at the unexpected turn of events. "Great," Linda said, her voice laced with a hint of amusement. "Just what we needed. A blackout." "Maybe it's a sign," I replied, trying to lighten the mood. "A sign that we should get out of the house and do something adventurous." She laughed softly, the sound echoing in the quiet. "Adventurous, huh? What do you have in mind? A candlelit picnic in the backyard?" "Or we could play some board games," I suggested, the idea forming in my mind. "It'll distract us, and who knows, it might be fun." "Board games it is," she agreed, a glimmer of excitement sparking in her eyes. We rummaged through the closet, pulling out an old game of Scrabble. Sitting on the living room floor, illuminated only by the faint light filtering through the windows, we began to play. The atmosphere shifted, the playful competition breaking the tension that had settled between us. "Your turn," I said, watching her carefully place her letters on the board, her tongue peeking out in concentration. "You know, you're really good at this." "Only because I've had a lot of practice," she replied, a playful glint in her eyes. "But I think you're just trying to flatter me." "Maybe I am," I shot back, unable to hide my grin. "But you have to admit, you're crushing me right now." Linda laughed, the sound bright and infectious, and I felt the walls I had built around myself begin to crumble. As we bantered back and forth, the air thickened with an undeniable chemistry. Each laugh, each teasing remark drew us closer together, and I could no longer ignore the magnetic pull I felt towards her. "Okay, let's make this interesting," I said, a sudden rush of daring coursing through me. "Loser has to do the winner's chores for a week." "Deal," she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "But you're going to regret that when I win." "Bring it on," I challenged, feeling a thrill of exhilaration. In that moment, the weight of our secrets and the world outside faded away, leaving just the two of us in our bubble of laughter and light. The night enveloped us in a blanket of silence, the kind that makes every sound feel amplified. The porch was dimly lit by the pale glow of a single lantern, casting soft shadows that danced around us. I could feel the weight of Linda's presence beside me, her warmth radiating in the cool air. We sat there, two souls adrift in our own turmoil, the night thick with unspoken words. "I've never felt so trapped," I finally admitted, breaking the silence that had cocooned us. The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. "It's like I'm living in a house of mirrors, seeing reflections of a life that feels so distant. Sarah, she doesn't see me anymore." I turned to Linda, her eyes glistening with understanding. I'm not sure she ever really did. She looked away for a moment, her gaze drifting to the darkened yard. I know what you mean, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. After Tom died, I felt like I was living in a shadow. It's as if the world moved on, and I was left behind, just existing. Her vulnerability resonated with me, and I could see the cracks in her armor. Some days I wonder if I'll ever feel whole again, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. It's hard to let go of the past, you know, especially when it feels like it's all I have left. There was a deep sadness in her eyes that stirred something within me, an urge to reach out and comfort her. I wish I could help you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You shouldn't have to feel this way. None of us should. I reached out, my fingers brushing against hers. It was a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. The connection was electric, and I could sense the shift in the air around us. Linda turned to me, her expression a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something that ignited a fire in my chest. Jake, she said softly, I never thought I'd find myself confiding in you like this. But it feels good to share this burden. She hesitated, her breath catching. You're not just my daughter's husband. You're a kindred spirit. The night stretched on, and I could feel the distance between us shrinking. I wish things were different, I murmured, my heart racing. I wish I could just... But before I could finish, she leaned in closer, her breath warm against my skin. Do you ever feel like you're standing at the edge of something? Like you're ready to jump, but you're terrified of what's below? Her words hung in the air, a challenge and an invitation all at once. Yes, I breathed, my heart pounding, every damn day. And then it happened. In a moment of reckless abandon, we were drawn together. Our lips met, tentative at first, then with an urgency that took my breath away. It was as if all the walls we had built crumbled in an instant, leaving only raw emotion in their wake. The kiss deepened, igniting a fire that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. I felt the world around us fade away, leaving nothing but the two of us, our fears, our desires, entwined in an embrace that felt both forbidden and electric. It was a whirlwind of passion and longing, and I knew we were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Jake, she murmured against my lips, and the sound of my name in her voice sent shivers down my spine. What are we doing? There was a mix of excitement and fear in her tone, and I pulled back, searching her eyes. I don't know, I stammered, the weight of our actions crashing down on me. But it feels like I'm finally alive. My heart raced, torn between the thrill of the moment and the reality of what it meant. Linda's gaze fell, her vulnerability on full display. This is wrong, she whispered, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something that mirrored my own conflict. But it feels so right. We stood on that precipice, teetering between desire and the consequences of our choices, caught in a web of emotions that threatened to ensnare us both. The night stretched on, heavy with unspoken promises and fears, leaving us to grapple with the enormity of what had just transpired. The morning light spilled into the room, casting a warm glow that felt almost mocking against the turmoil brewing inside me. I blinked awake, the events of last night crashing into my consciousness like a tidal wave. Linda, kissing her, holding her, losing myself in a moment that felt both exhilarating and devastating. Guilt washed over me, heavy and suffocating. How had I crossed that line? I glanced over at the empty space beside me, the sheets still slightly rumpled where she had lain. The reality of our actions settled in, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I forced myself out of bed, the weight of my thoughts dragging me down. I moved through the house, each creak of the floorboards echoing my internal conflict. I could hear the faint sound of dishes clinking from the kitchen, a reminder of the mundane life that felt so distant now. I found Linda standing at the sink, her back to me, lost in thought. The sight of her made my heart skip, but the memory of our kiss stung like a slap. "Good morning," I said, my voice a little rough, uncertain of how to bridge the chasm that had formed between us overnight. "Morning," she replied without turning around. Her tone was cool, clipped, and it felt like a wall had gone up between us. I stepped closer, trying to gauge her mood, but she seemed distant, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. I moved to pour myself a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air, but it did little to ease the tension hanging like a thick fog. We stood in silence, two strangers in a house that felt suddenly too small. I glanced over at her, catching a glimpse of her reflection in the window. She looked beautiful, but there was a shadow in her eyes that spoke volumes. "About last night," I started, my heart racing. I needed to address it, to find some semblance of clarity, but the words felt heavy on my tongue. "Jake, please," she interrupted, finally turning to face me. Her expression was a mix of hurt and regret. "Let's just forget it happened. It was a mistake." A mistake? The word hit me like a punch. It echoed in my mind, amplifying my guilt. But it felt real, Linda. I don't know how we can just pretend it didn't happen. "We have to. For Sarah's sake. For our families. This will ruin everything," she insisted, her voice rising slightly, a hint of desperation creeping in. "I can't bear the thought of being the cause of your marriage falling apart." I ran a hand through my hair, frustration bubbling inside me. What about what we felt? What about us? She looked down, her face a mask of conflict. "There is no us, Jake. There can't be. We crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed, and now we need to act like it never happened." "Act like it never happened?" I echoed incredulously. "How can you say that? It's not that simple." "Maybe it should be," she shot back, her eyes flashing with emotion. "You're married. I'm not some fantasy you can indulge in when things get tough. I'm your mother-in-law." The heat of her words stung, and I took a step back, my heart pounding. I know that, but we connected in a way I never expected. I can't just erase it from my mind. I'm not asking for a fantasy, Linda. I'm asking for honesty. "Honesty?" She scoffed, her voice trembling. "You want honesty? The honest truth is that we're both in a mess of our own making. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about your marriage, about Sarah, about everything we've built. We need to keep this under wraps." I felt the weight of her words, the implications sinking in. The thought of Sarah's face, the hurt in her eyes if she ever found out, made me recoil. So that's it? We just bury it? Pretend it didn't happen? "Yes," Linda said firmly, her gaze unwavering. "For everyone's sake, please, Jake, let's just forget." The silence that followed was palpable, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I could feel a part of me wanting to fight for what we had discovered, but another part recognized the truth in Linda's plea. This would destroy everything if we let it spiral out of control. Fine, I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. But it doesn't change what I feel. She nodded slowly, the weight of our unspoken desires hanging heavily in the air. Neither does it change what I feel, she admitted quietly. But we have to be strong. For them. With that, we returned to the awkward silence of breakfast, the unspoken words lingering like a ghost in the room, leaving us both feeling more alone than we had ever been. The days blurred into one another, each filled with an unbearable tension that hung in the air like a thick fog. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was teetering on the edge of something monumental, something I wasn't prepared to face. My phone buzzed on the counter, breaking my reverie. I picked it up to find a text from Sarah. "We need to talk. Meet me at the cafe." My heart sank. The urgency in her message sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I couldn't ignore it. I had to go. The cafe was a small, cozy place that Sarah loved. It smelled of fresh coffee and pastries, but today, the comforting scents did little to ease my nerves. I arrived early, my mind racing with thoughts of what Sarah might say. Would she confront me about Linda? Or had she sensed the emotional distance that had grown between us? I chose a secluded table in the corner, hoping I could collect my thoughts before she arrived. When Sarah walked in, her expression was a mix of determination and uncertainty. She spotted me immediately and made her way over, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. I could feel the weight of her gaze as she sat down, her fingers fidgeting with the napkin on the table. "Jake," she started, her voice steady yet tinged with an underlying tension. "I've been feeling like something's off between us. I can't shake the feeling that you've been distant." My heart raced. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I settled for a non-committal shrug. "I've just been busy with work, Sarah. You know how it is." Her eyes narrowed slightly, searching mine for the truth. "It's more than that, Jake. I can feel it. Is there someone else?" The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. I could feel the color drain from my face. "What? No, of course not," I protested, my voice rising slightly. "How can you even think that?" "I don't know. Maybe because you've been so preoccupied lately," she shot back, crossing her arms defensively. "I just need to know if there's something I should be worried about." I shifted in my seat, guilt gnawing at me. I couldn't tell her about Linda. I couldn't admit that, in my heart, I was wrestling with feelings I shouldn't have. "Sarah, I swear there's nothing going on. I'm just trying to figure things out." She looked at me, her expression softening slightly, but the tension still lingered. "I just wish you'd talk to me, Jake. If there's something wrong, we can fix it. I want to fix it." Her words struck a chord deep within me, a reminder of the love we once shared. But the image of Linda flashed in my mind, her laughter, her vulnerability, and the way she made me feel alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I felt trapped between two worlds, unable to fully commit to either. As I left the cafe, my mind was a chaotic whirlwind. I stepped out onto the busy street, the sounds of the city overwhelming my senses. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced at the screen to see a message from Linda. "Can we talk? I need to tell you something." I hesitated, but found myself heading to the park nearby, drawn by an invisible thread. I settled onto a bench, my heart pounding in anticipation of what she might reveal. It didn't take long for her to arrive, her demeanor tense, as if she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Jake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I could see the worry etched on her face. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I need to confess something." "Go on," I urged, my heart racing. "I've been seeing someone," she blurted out, her eyes wide with fear. "It's serious, and it could ruin everything. Our families." My breath caught in my throat. "What do you mean, Linda?" I could hardly process her words. The very foundation of our lives felt like it was crumbling beneath us. "I didn't want to hurt you or Sarah," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "But I can't pretend anymore. I've been trying to fill the void left by my husband, and I thought I could keep it separate, but it's all tangled now." I felt a storm of emotions, a mix of betrayal, confusion, and fear for what lay ahead. "Who is it?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. "That's not important right now. What matters is that we're both in deep, Jake. This isn't just about us anymore." As the weight of her confession sank in, I realized that our lives were spiraling into chaos. I stared out at the park, the sun setting in hues of orange and purple, and I felt utterly lost. How had we come to this point? The tension between us was palpable, and I knew that everything was about to unravel in ways we could never have anticipated.